Welcome to this live cast on our future economies. Capitalism, despite the tremendous increase in worldwide welfare through its innovative power and freedom, has at the same time a number of negative consequences. A transition is necessary to overcome ecological destruction, decrease in quality of life, and growing inequality. Given geopolitical developments, Europe has an important role to play in this transition. In the livecasts, we will start an open dialogue and discuss this transition with internationally renowned economists from all over the world. Questions will pass by, such as: each week, we will discuss these matters with 2 economists, resulting in 10 online dialogues in 10 weeks, where we will share viewpoints and collect ideas on how capitalism's innovative and creative powers can go hand in hand with fostering an equal and just society. A different subject every week. Together we can build a basis for economies that are beneficial to all of us. You can participate by putting your questions and remarks in the chat. So, let's talk.
Welcome to the 9th edition of the series The Future of Capitalism, a series initiated by the program Moral Markets in collaboration with Pakhuis de Zwijger. And every week we have the same script. We have an opening statement by a young economist and then followed by an interview of 2 international renowned economists and then an open discussion. This week we focus on the practical side of new different capitalism and discuss the viability of new market practices. Many ideas regarding this subject have already been developed and also discussed in the previous editions of these series. How can these practices, both in the business and in the financial sector, be embedded in the market system? What are obstacles that hinder the process towards a just transition? And what role can the European Union play in this regards? These questions and many more will be discussed today. And we will do that by kickstarting this conversation by an opening statement by Eefje de Gelder. She's a postdoc at the Technical University of Delft and the project manager of Moral Markets. After that, David van Overbeek, my co-host, will interview Luigi Zingales, who co-developed the Financial Trust Index, which is designed to monitor the level of trust that Americans have towards their financial system. In addition to being a professor of finance at the Chicago Booth School of Business, Zingales is currently a faculty research fellow for the National Bureau of Economic Research, a research fellow for the Center for Economic Policy Research, and a fellow of the European Governance Institute. He is also an editorialist for Il Sole 24 Ore, the Italian equivalent of the Financial Times. And in 2014, he was the president of the American Finance Association, and in 2015 he became the director of the Stiglitz Center at the University of Chicago. His latest book is A Capitalism for the People, Recapturing the Lost Genius of American Prosperity. After that, Christian Felber will be interviewed by David van Overbeek. And Christian is the founder of the Economy for the Common Good, based in Austria. The organization is a movement united over more than 10,000 people, supporters in 40 nations, and backed by 3,000 companies already, whose mission is to eliminate the fundamental contradiction between business values and social well-being. Felber is the author of many books, 15, including most recently, Change Everything, Creating an Economy for the Common Good. He lectured at several universities and is currently affiliate scholar at the IASS Potsdam. So we're so honored that the both of you are here. But this is not a television show; it's a discussion, it's a search for a new vision on new ideas for capitalism, and we hope also to involve the audience. And if you want to do that, you should go to the program page of Pakhuis de Zwijger of tonight and enter the Zoom webinar. And if you do so, you can ask questions by using the Q&A button. And these questions will be led to us here at the table, and we can pose these questions to our guests of tonight. Okay. If you're all ready, I would like to introduce now the first speaker. And I would like to give her the floor. A warm welcome to Eefje de Gelder.
If love would reign over the world, all laws would be dispensable. This is a quote by Aristotle, with which I would like to start this column, stolen right out of Magister Felber's book, I must admit. In our series of dialogues, we question if we need to reset and reform capitalism and how. Should and can governments make laws for companies to make markets contribute more or more effectively to human flourishing? Or are firms themselves able to connect the common good with profit maximization? This has all to do with incentives in markets. To illustrate how incentives in markets often work, I'll give you an insight in me buying bananas. Supermarkets offer me different types of bananas, reflecting different economic mechanisms and ideologies. I rank them from the cheapest banana to the most expensive. Well, option A is the unbranded banana, somewhat €1 for 5 or 6 pieces, coming often from large-scale plantations over the ocean. The same holds for a banana from a big company, option B, such as Chiquita or Dole, a bit more expensive. Then C is a fair trade banana from a fair trade company, usually the one with the smallest shelf and the most expensive. Alternatively, I could go elsewhere to buy a super fair trade, super expensive banana from a corporation based on solidarity. In the Netherlands, specifically, I'm referring to, for example, Odin, and for other products, World Shops, that will most likely appeal to Mr. Felber's ideas. I'm always in doubt what to do. Intuitively, I'm in favor of the most ethical one, but it's more expensive. And don't the other ones just face economies of scale? And what's wrong with that? My choice has implications for what I can do with my life. Buying the cheapest bananas will enable me to save more and spend it on other goods. I can do so even if I am aware that the company offering these bananas may not provide the banana producers with a decent income or provide good working conditions. In the literature, a well-known mechanism has been described. People say they want to contribute to what can be considered the common good. They love having decent working and exchange conditions for everyone. But once people are in the supermarket, other ideas start reigning their minds. They don't walk, they lovely talk. This mechanism occurs in many markets and at company levels as well. Think only about the phenomenon of greenwashing or fairwashing. Should and how can we change this, given how incentives typically function? I'm curious to know the position of both speakers tonight. Should we start requiring big companies to ensure decent working conditions for producers, so that these producers can also have a good life as well? Or should we implement an entirely different system in which only solidarity-based companies exist, rather than profit maximization companies? And what shall we say about the freedom of enterprises? Finally, I'm especially eager to know if, whatever market system one implements, the troubles of current capitalism won't occur again. After all, Aristotle already implied that love doesn't rule the world. I'll end with what I've recently decided on the banana quest. I'm now taking ideological turns. 1 week the fair trade banana, the other week the cheapest, and every now and then I visit a cooperative shop. I'm curious to know if that will change after tonight's dialogue. Thank you.
Let's go to the first interview by David van Overbeek with Luigi Zingales.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Professor Zingales, for being here with us tonight. Almost 50 years ago, Milton Friedman famously stated that the sole responsibility of a company is to increase its profits. Now, there has been a lot of debate about what Mr. Friedman actually meant when he said that. But it's quite possibly beyond doubt that Mr. Friedman's influence over the last 50 years has been pretty large on business and economics as well. in the US, the views of Mr. Friedman have become quite unpopular over time. Consider, for example, Mr. Sanders, Mrs. Warren. And also in our series, he was mentioned pretty often as an antagonist towards what we should be doing with our capitalist system. Why do you think his views have become more unpopular over time? And do you share the sentiment that I currently describe?
So first of all, let me start thanking you for inviting me, and start also with a little bit of an infomercial. At the Steeler Center, we have a online publication called Pro Market that hosted a very lively debate on Friedman 50 years later. And I think that I would draw from that debate to explain why I think that Friedman was where Friedman was right and where Friedman was wrong, and why there is so much resentment against Friedman today, because I think that where he was wrong has been deteriorated and need to be fixed. So I think that I'm very convinced that not only capitalism in general, but also the maximization of shareholders' value work fairly well when firms are both price takers and rule takers, and where there is an effective democracy in place. Let me explain this, what I mean. When I say price taker, means that they don't have market power, and that's something that a lot of people have emphasized. And to be honest, Friedman himself in 1962 emphasized. But the second is more important. What does it mean, rule takers? Is that they don't interfere in the democratic process in the setting up of rules. And in addition, there is something that Friedman does not emphasize, but I think is very important, is that for capitalists to work well, you need an active democratic process to work. So let me make an example that is dear and hard to most of you.
Yes.
Think about the problem of climate change and carbon tax. As economists, we know that the most effective way to fix this problem is to impose a carbon tax and to let firms maximize profits, because they're going to internalize the cost they produce in the environment through the carbon tax. So why don't we see more carbon tax? And I studied a bit, a very interesting example, because in the state of Washington, not only the government Isley that tried to pass it in the legislature and fail, but there were two referenda asking the population if they wanted a carbon tax. And actually, they both failed by a very substantial margin. And why did they fail? Part of it was a failure in politics, okay? Because the first proposal that was designed by an economist, actually, was very clever and introduced a carbon tax, but a reduction in the sales tax to make sure that the carbon tax was what we economists call revenue neutral. However, some very radical groups started to say that this was penalizing X, penalizing Y, penalizing Z. So they voted against and propaganda against the carbon tax, even if this was something that everybody recognized is a good step forward.
Yeah.
But second, in both referenda, companies, particularly BP and Chevron, put a lot of money to make sure that people did not get the fair representation of what the carbon tax represents. So I don't think that the best solution is to have every firm internalize naturally the cost of carbon tax. The best solution is to have a lively democratic process, but this lively democratic process cannot be interfered massively by firms. And this is, I think, where Milton Friedman to some extent got it wrong, because he says you have to maximize profits following rules and competition, but he did not anticipate or internalize the fact that those rules are designed by firms, and often they are designed by firms in a very distorting way. So the solution to me is get the firms out of the political business and let the good democracy work.
Thank you. A lot of things in there which I'd like to discuss during the discussion part of tonight, but let's just focus for now on one of the issues that you mentioned. I believe in your book in 2012, A Capitalism for the People, you already mentioned the increase of lobbying power or the rule-making power of businesses. And you say that it doesn't help with the capitalist system in America, right? It's very compromising to as well. So how do you explain this increase in lobbying power?
I think there are a lot of reasons, and I only have a few seconds. So let me give you what I consider the biggest one. The biggest one is in the 60s and 70s. I don't remember the 60s. I was born in the 60s, but the 70s, I do remember them. In the 60s and 70s, what is considered the left or center left of the political spectrum was despising business. And by doing so, and I think a healthy separation from business. And that kept also the right wing or the center right more leery of being completely in the pocket of business. Over the 80s, and even more so in the 90s, everywhere in the world, this is not just a US phenomenon, it's just a UK phenomenon, it's not just a European phenomenon, is everywhere in the world. The center left went in bed with business. And what is the ultimate proof is retired center-left leaders became important lobbyists or members of this everywhere in the world, from Schroeder that goes and becomes chairman of Gazprom to Bill Clinton that is paid $1 million a pop to give speeches, to Blair, you name it, and they're all there. As a result, the competition in the political system was not based on who is more distant from business, but who gets more money from business. And as a result, I think that business got disproportional influence. And the problem is that once this channel is available, then is in the interest of each individual business to play the game. And that's the reason why this should be regulated, this should be intervened by the political system. The problem is that democracy itself has been infected by this. So we need to fix democracy to fix cooperation, but if we don't fix cooperation, we don't fix democracy.
Yes. So let's park the lobbying part also as well for the discussion part. And there's an academic paper you wrote with Professor Oliver Hart in 2018, in which you try to bring together these two elements. You say, well, firms, they should in some way not focus on profit maximization in terms of shareholder value, but their wealth. Right, so it's the welfare. The welfare is important for the shareholders, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
what is
the
distinction
point
between
is
that?
very simple, to some extent trivial, but actually quite important. Well, if I run my own firm, I'm 100% owner, I don't necessarily maximize profit. I maximize my utility. And so if I care about the environment, if I care about the community, if I care about climate change, I might reduce my profits. Exactly like the young economist was saying from the consumer point of view, but I spend a little bit more because I like a banana that is fair trade grown. I might actually decided to receive a little bit less profit in order to do something that I feel is important. Now, the society as it is structured today makes it impossible for corporations to receive this input from the shareholders. So the moment my company goes public, then all the people involved say they have to maximize profits and ignore the sorry that there is a noise in the back, but I cannot stop it. They need to they prevent shareholders to communicate to corporations what their social goals are. And I think that the research in the last couple of years that I've been doing with Oliver Hart is being really in the direction of saying, what can we do to make it easier? And one important distinction is we don't expect everybody to do so. We don't expect people to be forced, or we don't want people forced to do that. The only way to do it is through the democratic process. But at the very minimum, we don't want to prevent people with a heart to have their heart embedded in their investment choices. That is, to me, it seems a minimum level that even any libertarian should agree with.
So get corporations out of the democratic process, but maybe introduce some democratic elements within corporations, right? So how can a board of directors then maximize the welfare of a company's shareholder? What can they do, practically speaking? Oh,
I think it's very simple, is they just ask the shareholders what to do. If I give you an example that fortunately is not very relevant to Europe, but is very relevant in the United States. Several years ago, one shareholder of Walmart tried to put on the ballot a request to prohibit Walmart from selling AK-47, the machine guns that are used basically to do the mass shootings.
Yes.
And you know what? The board of Walmart refuses to have that vote. This shareholder appealed to the SEC. They went through the legal process. And basically through the legal process, they were able to stop having that vote. Eventually, Walmart caved in and they're not selling AK-47 anymore. But the point is, they didn't let the shareholders express their opinion. Yeah. And there is no doubt that selling AK-47 gives Walmart more profits. And however, there is no doubt that a lot of people, like your first economist, will be willing to sacrifice maybe a penny a share in dividends in order to make sure that there are fewer mass shootings. And so the simple point that Oliver Arden and I make is, let shareholders express their opinion. We don't want this decision to be made by the board of directors because we appoint managers because they are good at running business, not because they are good at trading off social values with money. That decision is ultimately a shareholder's decision and should let them express their opinion.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for now, Professor Zingales.
Yes. Let's go to the second interview of tonight, and that is done by David van Overbeek again with Christian Felber.
Mr. Felber, thank you for being here tonight with us. In this series, we're trying to reimagine capitalism, and a major theme within your books is the idea that within our current economic model, money has become a goal in itself instead of a means to an end. Now, I'd like to see how your ideas tie in with Mrs. Zingales, but perhaps we'll do that during the discussion. But for now, I'm trying to set the scene and how you view, what your views are on this. So first off, let me ask you, what led you to the conclusion that money has become a goal in itself instead of a means to an end?
Yeah, I also want to thank for the invitation and for the opportunity to have an inspiring discussion with Mr. Zingales. Well, the answer on your first question is quite simple. We used to measure success in the economy with financial indicators. GDP, financial profit of companies, or the return on investment, the financial return on investment. These are monetary indicators. And with them, we measure success in the economy, first and foremost. And success is measured always and everywhere, not only in the economy, according to the goals and their achievement. Yes. And that's already the system error, because in the true economy, defined for the first time by Aristotle, who was already mentioned, he said that the goal of an economy is not to make money or to increase capital, but the goal of the original oikonomia was the well-being of the members of the household, was the common good. And accordingly, success would have been to measured with some qualitative common good well-being indicators. And he also said when the means of money or capital turned into the goal, then this wouldn't be economy anymore. It would turn the economy into its opposite, which he defined as capitalism. The ancient Greek word was chrematistike, the art of making money and to enrich oneself. But today, the term we use is capitalism, and that's an extremely enlightening legacy of Aristotle, that capitalism and economy are opposites.
Yeah. So how did we end up here? How did we end up in this situation?
Well, actually, Aristotle was the thought leader until the mid of the 19th century, because all through the time, to all philosophers, and philosophy included economics for thousands of years. Adam Smith, for an example, he was not an economist by his formation. He was a philosopher. He was even a moral philosopher. And the political economy in his times was one part of the moral philosophy. And it was always clear to all of them that the overarching goal of economic activities should be the common good. And this was for which economic actors should strive. And only in the second half of the 19th century, there was a divergent of neoclassical economics, which wanted to throw out everything that had to do with politics. So no political economy anymore, pure economics from now on, and everything that had to do with ethics and with qualitative values, because they wanted to become scientists as precise and sharp as physicists. And that's why they focused exclusively on financial indicators and values. And that was the fundament on which later we created GDP to measure the success of national economies, that we stared at the financial profit of companies first and foremost, instead of just being a condition for the survival of the company, and the return on investment of every financial return of investment of every investment, instead of looking first and foremost on the impact of that investment from the environment, the global climate, the social cohesion, distribution, gender relations, and our real values. Actually, neoclassical economics pushed out, crowded out our real values from human dignity to the common good, whereas focusing just on the means and turning by that the original idea of an economy, of a true economy, into its opposite, which Aristotle defined as capitalism. Of course, in capitalism, it's first and foremost about making money or increasing capital. But we should be aware that that is the opposite of an original and also a sound and holistic economy.
That's very clear. Thank you. So you propose that our current economic model should integrate values that are central to human relations, such as empathy, trust, recognition, respect, etc., in order to create a more human economy. How can we put these ethical values into practice, into a new economic model?
Well, changing the whole paradigm step by step, rethinking the economy as a whole, as an exercise to increase the common good. That's already in many democratic constitutions. The Bavarian constitution says the whole economic activity serves the common good. Then we have to rethink companies. Textbooks of economic science today teach that the theory of the enterprise is that enterprises are organizations that increase their financial profit, just as Milton Friedman still today. Take, for instance, the textbook of Robert Pindick and Daniel Rubinfeld. They define the company as a profit maximizing organization. We have to rethink it and reteach it. And then, of course, we have to re-educate managers. Managers are not should not be maximizers or optimizers of financial indicators first and foremost. They should be philosophers and ethicists and ecologists, and equally on their dashboards have ecological indicators and social indicators. And last but not least, their reporting and accounting duties should not exclusively focus on financial indicators, but their reporting and accounting duties should equally comprise non-financial indicators, which are all these ethical indicators, from human rights to gender, to democracy, to climate stability or biodiversity. All these has to be included in the idea of the economy, of the company, of management, and last but not least, sorry to have forgotten this, the image of man. The image of man of neoclassical science only was born in the beginning of the 20th century. That's extremely important to know that Homo economicus in this term was for the first time mentioned by Wilfredo Pareto in 1902. So it's an extremely young phenomenon. It's a phantasma. It has nothing to do with the original oikonomia, and it has nothing to do with reality. So every and each aspect of the Homo economicus has been falsified by interdisciplinary sciences. And that's why changing the image of humans that economists spread, reconsidering humans as social beings, as cooperative, as generous, as empathic, and as willing to share, is one of these conditions to bring these fundamental values that are already in the constitutions, but they are not in the economic textbooks. And only when they are migrate from constitutions to economic textbooks, including the image of man that economists preach and propagate, then we will also be able to change the practical behavior in the real economy.
Yes, thank you. A lot of ideas to unpack during the discussion part tonight. Looking forward to that. But just sticking to this economic model based on honesty, trust, recognition, respect, empathy, these values, you contrast these with values such as competition, self-interest, and profiteering, for example. Are these two categories, are they exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive?
I would say so. And the point of departure is that we, at the moment, to design the economy, another observation, the economy is human-made. So it's not a natural phenomenon. Just the ecological boundaries are a natural limit to economic practice. But the economy is man-made. Markets are designed by humans. And as a logical consequence, markets, in our view, should have to be designed according to the democratically defined fundamental values. If you look at our constitutions, there are these fundamental values already defined and enshrined in these constitutions. Human dignity, solidarity, justice, sustainability, democracy, transparency. These are democratic fundamental values according to which markets should be designed, companies should be designed, and also the ethical image of man should be taught at universities and business schools. And if you take these other values that you mentioned, which are included implicitly in economic textbooks, which is egoism, which is competition orientation, which is pursuit of financial goals first and foremost, materialism and growth, you will not find any of these values that are included in economic science in any democratic constitution. And I would say they contradict each other, not completely. As soon as we put the democratic values first as real values and use financial values, for instance, just as means, then the full picture is sound and right. But we should never consider capital or money as ends in and of themselves, because then we pervert the economy into capitalism, and then we will cause all these collateral damages that you mentioned in the introduction.
Yes. Well, I'm also asking that because when you think about the image of men, I must say that man is, of course, a cooperative being, but also a being which is in competition with another human, right? Competition, you could say, is also part of human nature. So how should that have a part in the new economic model that you sketch?
Well, competition is only part of human nature insofar as our genes allow us all options. They give us the liberty if we prefer to love each other or to kill each other. They give us this permission, but then we have to decide ethically, always and everywhere. And our genes give us the liberty to cooperate or to compete, actually to counterpete in the meaning of acting one against each other. And we have to decide ethically in the same way as we decide ethically if we prefer to love or to hate, to let live or to kill, if we rather should cooperate or counterpete against each other. So it's an ethical decision. So it's a question of the design of the game rules of the economy. And now the question is, why would we prefer competition or counterpetition over cooperation? And the myth with which economists are arguing that competition is a good thing, first of all, they say it's natural, but I just try to dismiss that myth, number one. And the second myth with which economists try to argue competition over cooperation is that they say it is motivating humans more strongly than cooperation. And this is falsified as well. It's just not true. There is psychological research about the motivational force of cooperation and competition compared. And the result is both motivate humans. So competition does motivate humans, but cooperation motivates humans more strongly. And the reason why is because both motivate humans differently. Whereas cooperation motivates humans by flourishing relationships, that's social psychology and psychological science. I'm a psychologist, by the way. Whereas competition motivates humans first and foremost by fear. So I don't see any reason why we should incentivize companies to act against one another. In an economy for the common good, we have free enterprise in the meaning of enhancing economic initiative. We enhance every person or collective to start a company, but then we do not enhance them to act against others, but to try to cooperate with others. In capitalism, that's nonsensical. This doesn't make sense at all. In an economy for the common good, which is an ethical market economy, it makes all sense.
Yes. Thank you, Magister Felber. For now, looking forward to unpack these ideas during the discussion part. Let's move over to that right now.
Yeah, time for an open conversation between our guests of tonight, and also an invitation to you, the viewers, to actually participate in sending in questions, comments via the Zoom link on the program page. Yeah, before I will start the debate, I will first go to Professor Zingales and ask him to respond, of course, to what Christian Felber just said.
What he said is very interesting, and I said I agree strongly with half of it, and I disagree strongly with the remaining half. Let me start with the part I disagree with. It seems that he skipped from Aristotle to the 20th century, missing the 18th and 19th century, and in particularly the key figure of Adam Smith. As he said, Adam Smith is a moral philosopher. He was interested in the common good, but was the first one to have the intuition that you don't need people individually to aim at the common good, for the system to aim at the common good. That was the brilliant intuition that Adam Smith brought to the picture. And surprise, surprise, when this intuition took off, the standard of living, first of the West and then of the rest of the world, increased dramatically. So Aristotle was a great philosopher, but will still dying of every possible form of disease at age 40 if capitalism had not come into the picture. And I think that the key element is competition, but here there is a common misunderstanding that in part is due to linguistic reasons. In Italian, fortunately, there are two words to say competition. There is concorrenza and competizione. Concorrenza is when two companies compete against each other. Competition is when you run for a prize. And those two things are completely different. I agree with Christian that cooperation is very important, is a very important motivating factor. In fact, I would go even farther. I say that the reason why the Homo sapiens made what it made is because it was able to actually cooperate with other members of the same species in a way that other animals are not able to do. So cooperation is extremely important. However, I don't believe in collusion. So when you have firms sitting around the same table, very often, as Adam Smith says, every time men of the same trade turned around the same table, even for casual reasons like merry and enjoyment, that they don't drift into conspiring to keep low the wages of their workers, high the price of the product, manipulate the regulation. So I think that this is the dangerous part. And the part that I am concerned by what Christian is saying is when he talks about philosopher king, re-education of managers, it sounds very much an oppressive regime that dictates what is right and what is wrong, and even for companies what they should do, what is not do. I experienced, my country experienced this regime 80 years ago, was called fascist and was terrible. And fascist was talking about the ethical state, the ethical company, the common good. Now, they define very differently from what we define. But I think that companies should have the freedom to pursue what they want with the right regulation imposed by a democratic process. Imposing value is something that I refrain from.
Christian Felber, you probably want to respond now.
Yeah, Ms. Zingales is truly a great conversation partner, and he gives me a lot of stuff to answer. Let's start with Adam Smith. I remember that I did mention him, And you referred to his metaphor of the invisible hand, which he mentioned only one time in his 800 pages oeuvre, The Wealth of Nations. And nobody paid attention to this metaphor until Paul Samuelson in the mid of the 20th century, because it was not important for his work, but it was instrumentalized and I would say abused by Paul Samuelson in order to justify egoism, which was not Adam Smith's intention. First, when he said that in this one and single occasion, he was just observing the baker, the brewer, and the butcher of his times. And these were tiny companies, even handicraft organizations that were not transnational corporations, and they could not behave egoistically at the cost of others. They would have immediately lost the trust of everyone else, and they would have gone bankrupt. And he was just describing that, but it was not a normative postulate telling companies to behave greedy and egoistic. If Adam Smith would have known that today we have transnational corporations and we have investment funds with billions of assets in their stocks, he would never have encouraged them, saying you don't need to be benevolent. That's what's his wording. It's not necessary to be benevolent. You can just search for your own advantage, and that's it. That's one. And second, he wrote The Wealth of Nations after writing the theory of moral sentiments. And in the theory of moral sentiments, he laid down his moral image of man. And there was a whole section where he advocated not only for benevolence, but he advocated for universal benevolence. And even saying that an ethically sound and fine human person will not rest until knowing that the last living being in the last corner of the universe is well as well. That was his ethos, and but that was not read by neoclassical economics. It was just dismissed and forgotten in the same way they forgot what economy actually means. With concurrenza and the other term, I got a little bit lost. I just want to remind again that competition comes from the Latin words cum and petere, and means petere, to look for together and not against one another. So actually what we are advocating for is a true competition where companies search together for the best solution. Of course, and here I'm totally in line with Mr. Zingales, not forming a cartel. Oh my God, I think we don't need to discuss this. Economy for the common good is against cartels. We would strengthen fusion control. We would even put size limits for companies in order that they cannot build cartels. I think this is a commonality. And I would even now refer to a point of Mr. Zingales. He said that companies should be price takers and rule takers. I agree, but still I could enlarge the picture. I would reverse it. I would say companies should be rule takers and then price takers. And maybe a third one, and the rules should be made by the people. But Mr. Zingales said in a different argument. So I think we also agree here. And the rules should be in the way that that companies are not only, there is a difference. Mr. Zingales, you said that you don't want to prescribe companies what they should do and not. You only would give them a basic regulation and then they are free. But that's exactly the same. If you give them a basic regulation, then they are not free. They have to stick and comply with the basic regulation. And the only difference from today's markets and common good markets is that they're not only obliged to report on and disclose financial information, loss and profit and a balance sheet, but they're equally obliged by the policymaker, by the legal framework, to disclose ethical information on human rights, on climate stability, on biodiversity, on gender and on distribution. And within this framework, within the boundaries of the common good, they are free to do whatever they want to do. The Constitution of Colombia says literally in Article 333 economic initiative is free, I agree, within the boundaries of the common good. That's exactly what the market economy of the future could be about.
Okay, so let me check, Mr. Zingales. If these rules imposed upon companies are democratically decided, would you agree that would be allowed, or is that, as you call it, even fascist?
So I'm in favor of more disclosure. Now, we have to realize that everything comes at a cost, and generally this disclosure happens to only hit the largest companies, and that creates a disincentive to go public and so on and so forth. But so in moderation, I think disclosure is good, particularly when it comes to externality like pollution. Okay, so I think that having companies disclose more what they dump into the environment. I know that in the Netherlands now you have a major problem with the PFOAs. Why? Because DuPont, that now changed its name, but DuPont dump an enormous amount of PFOAs in your environment with enormous cost. And I study actually what DuPont did in the United States. They were buying the regulator with the revolving door, doing everything wrong in the process. Okay, so I am the first one to say disclosure is good. We should have more. Within this disclosure, I don't think that we should say to a company, you have to do this, more than we have to say to an individual, you have to do this. So I think that an element of freedom is also freedom of enterprise. So as I am free to start the business I want within the rules of the game, I should be free to have a corporation with the objective I want. Of course, within a rule. Can I start a business to massacre people? No, that's against the law. And in the same way in which my freedom as an individual is limited by infringing on everybody else's freedom, I think I am in favor of restriction on the freedom of enterprise. However, in the same way in which I don't say you should be a good Catholic or you should do this, I don't think that you should say to a corporation, you should do this.
Clear. Mr. Felber.
There is a fundamental difference, because I would strongly advocate for treating natural persons, which are humans, which enjoy human rights, different from legal persons, which are not humans, which enjoy no human rights, and which have to be regulated stronger. Because if you treat natural persons and legal persons equally, then of course the rule of the jungle will rule. Because legal persons grow up to transnational corporation and they smash everybody else's liberty down. Let me put this together with the banana example. I am advocating that markets are designed. Markets, by the way, are a public infrastructure. All fundamental elements of markets are laid by policymakers after a more or less democratic process. I think there we agree that this process should be as democratic as possible. And one option is to design markets obliging companies already today to disclose only their financial information. That's not a voluntary exercise, Mr. Zingales, that's a legal duty for these companies. And why would we discriminate and making financial reporting a legal duty and non-financial reporting a voluntary exercise? And then the big corporations that are unscrupulous and they are reckless and non-considerate, they can lower their costs at the cost of the environment, at the cost of labor force, at the cost of human rights, and getting lower prices. And this is the banana dilemma. The most ethical bananas that respect our fundamental values are the most expensive bananas. And exactly this is what the economy for the common good changes. We make all four companies, banana companies, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We make them report on their ethical performance. And then that one with the best ethical performance pays less taxes. And that one with the worst ethical performance pays higher taxes. They get priority in public procurement. They don't get a public contract. They trade more freely, market access. They trade less freely until the prices of the most solidary, sustainable, and whatever ethical banana is lower than the price of the least ethical, the most destructive banana. And this choice that you design markets like this or like this is my answer to your student, is not your choice as a consumer. This is your choice as a citizen. And the citizens should design markets in the way that those who fulfill our fundamental values, including climate stability and biodiversity, should have an easier life than those who endanger and even destroy these fundamental values. That's the core of the mechanism, the functioning of an economy for the common good.
Yeah. So, Mr. Zingales, Professor Zingales, Christian Felber suggests that the state, a democratic state, should use its institutions like taxation or procurement to actually benefit the most ethical, according to the rules of the game, the democratic decided ethical principles, and benefit those. Do you agree that that is a legitimate behavior of states, or would you think that is against the freedom of enterprise?
So first of all, I want to clarify, because maybe I wasn't clear. I'm very open to the idea to mandate further disclosure. The only point I was making is that this comes at a cost. There is no free lunch. And so this will impose more burden, number one. But I'm happy to do it in some cases, especially if we explain very well what are we disclosing and what is the cost, the externality generated by that disclosure. Mm-hmm. And I think that the risk is that we go to an equilibrium in which we go to marketing, because today, for example, the ESG criteria, they're not even correlated one with the other. So we don't know when a company is high in ESG, if he has only paid a lot to the certifier, or if it's really an ethical company, number one. Number two, the very definition of ethical is very difficult, okay? And I give you an example. I'm sure you're familiar with Craigslist, okay? This is a website where you post if you have an apartment for rent, a car for sale, etc. Is a company that helps tremendously poor students relocate, sell their cars, etc. And the founder, Craig Newman, is actually devolving most of the profits to charitable cause. So the most ethical company you can think in the face of earth. Now, their behavior actually destroyed the industry of newspapers in the United States and probably around the world because they were living off the profits from classified ads. And today, without that, they close down. Not only they close down, they need to radicalize in order to have readers. So they polarize. And so you can blame the entire polarization of the US and the rest of the world on one person, Craig Newman. Now, is he ethical or not ethical? That's the complicated question that I don't want to have a state to decide, because then this is a dangerous thing. Is it ethical that I read books that Christian does not like? Maybe not. And so all of a sudden, the book that I like are starting to cost more, to the point that they're priced off the market, so I cannot read them anymore. This is really is the beginning of fascism. And that's what I resist in all form of shapes.
Now I'm a little bit disappointed, because, Mr. Zingales, you do not see that the legal obligation, the enforced law by the state that companies have to do and disclose a financial balance sheet is an ethical decision. And it's not fascism, it's a democratically legitimated ethical decision. Same as protecting private property and not protecting common property in the same way is an ethical decision. Giving priority to private property rather than to common property is an ethical decision. I do agree with your ECG dilemma, because that was exactly the same argument of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman said that he is against social responsibility because everybody could understand something different by social responsibility. Same we could say with the common good, as every individual person could understand something different by the common good. We cannot leave it to the liberty and to the voluntarity of companies to do good. because every company would do good differently. And maybe some companies would even discriminate against homosexuals. That was Friedman's example, doing so. So that's why we need a common rule, and that's exactly our approach. And the first example where a legitimated democratic body has done so is surprisingly in the US. The city of Portland has decided that those companies that allow a high degree of inequality, 100 times the pay of the highest pay related to the lowest pay, they pay a higher tax rate, plus 10%. And if it's getting excessive, which is an ethical decision, again, excessive, they said, is from 250 times upwards.
Christian Felber, please respond also to what Mr. Zingales, Professor Zingales is saying about crony capitalism, right? I mean, the infectious power of companies on the political democratic process, where he started this evening with this argument, and also in his book, of course, the influence of lobby, and so also sometimes the distrust you have in institutions we have, public institutions we have.
Yeah, I wanted to jump from Portland and now also San Francisco, who are applying an economy for the common good, taxing companies who create a higher inequality, stronger than companies who contribute to a more equal society. This was decision of parliaments. And I totally agree again with Professor Zingales when he proposes to keep business completely out from the democratic decision-making process. And I would like to pick up your example, Mr. Zingales, of the carbon tax. The carbon tax failed because it was, in some referendums, I know many referendums, and maybe it's the first exception that the citizen in referendum on ecological topics decided against ecology. I think that's the first example I learned from you. All other examples, citizens decided more ecologically than their governments. But I have a concrete example which could also be in your favor, which is the citizen assemblies that started in Ireland and now were taking place both in Germany and in France. And that one in France was about climate change and climate stability. And of course, in these processes where a part of the citizens participated, no vested interest groups, no pressure groups were allowed. And the outcome of this climate protection citizen assembly in France was that they proposed to put climate protection as a state goal in the French constitution, that did not allow to enlarge or build new airports, that they were even prohibiting domestic flights if there is a fast velocity train, and a strong carbon tax, by the way. So the flaws of democracy can be fixed, and one innovation that allows a better democracy without business and pressure groups are these citizen assemblies. And I think this is again something where we would meet again.
Let's go to Professor Zingales. I would like to give you the opportunity to respond, of course, but there are also two questions from the audience to you. And the first is, why do you think Rutger Klaassen, a Dutch name, asks, why do you think shareholders are willing to give up voluntarily their financial interest in maximizing profits? By and large, he means. So he would like to know, why do you believe that shareholders would have a more ethical position in companies if they would have the chance? And the other question is from Camilla Posada, and she wants to know whether this idea of you of enabling companies to listen more to their shareholders' values, what do you think of her argument that she says that only allows people with financial ability to invest a voice, and she asks why we shouldn't give other stakeholders a voice, and then you come to a more democratic institution like Christian Felber just introduced.
Thank you. I think there are two excellent questions. So the first one is, why do I think that shareholders might have some pro-social objective? for two reasons. Number one is because you see in the data that people behave in a way that is pro-social, not a lot, but a little. So think about wearing a mask under COVID in all the places where it's not mandatory. I think you don't do it for yourself because the mask does not really protect you, but protects the others from you. And we see a lot of people doing it. And actually, exactly in the Netherlands, there is a very interesting question in which they ask the pensioners of a pension fund. And they say, are you prepared to give up some of the return? Of course, not all the return. You have to live in the old age, but a little bit of your return in order to enhance some, for example, environmental objective. And the majority of them said yes. So do I think that everybody in the world is like that? No. Do I want, and this is, I think, my disagreement with Christian, do I want to enforce everybody to be like that? No, because that's an ethical state. But certainly I want to leave the people who are good to display the potential, the benefits of being good. And I claim that the current system is designed to make them worse than they are. So I think it's very important to go in that direction. Now, the second question is also very important about why do we give more power to the shareholders? And the answer is no. Actually, today, the shareholders have the least amount of power on social issue. Why? Because as a consumer, I am like the economist, the young economist in the introduction. I have the choice to don't eat the banana if they have been produced with slave labor or child labor. Okay? If I am an employee, I can walk away from Google because Google is in bed with the Pentagon. And we have seen that the employees have been incredibly important in this direction. The only one that never asked are the shareholders. Why, as a customer, I have the choice, as a employee, I have a choice, and as shareholders, I have a choice to sell my shares, but I don't have a choice to actually impact what this company do in the same way in which the employees have that and the consumers have that.
Christian Felber.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but now I have to really disagree again, because shareholders are not that powerless as you described them. Of course, consumers are not powerless either, but shareholders have a lot of power. And as much as I like the example of Walmart you gave, I think it's radically atypical for what is happening on capital markets, because the typical situation is that the shareholder of a transnational corporation is an investment fund. And the conversation between the company and the shareholder is a one-by-one between the CEO and the fund manager. And fund managers, they are the most financially driven actors in the economy. And we're even observing activist fund managers. That doesn't contradict that Larry Fink said, we in the future also want to include some social purpose, but he's the last to do so voluntarily. And that's just one sentence, I give you back the word. That's why we say the bigger and the more powerful a company and its shareholders, the more duties it would have to fulfill, from non-financial reporting to incentives linked to this non-financial reporting, making prices, correcting prices, and also a size limit to corporations that they cannot become that excessively powerful as they are today.
Yes. Professor Zingales, do you agree that size matters and that we should do something about it?
No, of course size matters. I would come back on that because I think this is where maybe we agree with
exactly.
Christian. And I also agree in the description of the capital market that it is today. I think the point is missing is that those institutional investors depend on people like Christian and myself who have their pension money invest in the stock market. Those are, you have zero money invest in the stock market, Christian?
We have a national solidarity pension scheme in Austria.
Okay, so maybe in your case it's different. Most Americans have some money invested in the stock market, part of their pension, like in the Netherlands. So those are the powerless shareholders. And those are the ones who don't matter. In fact, my goal is for next year is to send a shareholders letter to Larry Fink, because he writes a letter to all the CEOs saying what they should do. But who is he? Because his power derives from our money, and we are completely silent in that game. I want a world in which you have an option of a vanguard that is environmental, and a vanguard that is social, and a vanguard that is environmental and social, and a vanguard that is purely egoistic. And people can choose, but then the intermediaries of those funds have a responsibility to vote accordingly to what their shareholders want. And in case you are to the press that shareholders don't matter, let me tell you that at the last shareholders meeting on Walt Disney, a proposition by shareholders to force Walt Disney to disclose all their lobbyings and all their campaign contributions reached 35% of the votes. So if BlackRock and Vanguard decide to vote in favor, those resolutions are automatically approved. And in my view, this will change the world. But I agree with you, and that's a point that let's sort of focus on also what we agree. I agree with you that there is a gigantic distinction between the butcher, the baker, the small corporation, and the transnational corporation.
Exactly.
And so if you are saying we should have two set of rules for the really big ones and the small ones, I am with you. And I think that the solution is not necessarily to burden everybody with a responsibility, but those companies are either too large to exist. If you have too much market power, too much political power, maybe you are too large to exist, and we should break it down with a monopoly. Or if you can't, think about Google. I am open to say we need to impose a societal rule to Google. Why? Because Google is a monopoly. But I don't want to impose to my plumber to behave ethically or to because they are too small. So the point that you made exactly with Adam Smith is true. Adam Smith lives in a world of butchers and bakers. We live in a world where at least part of the economy is run by multinational corporations that are accountable to no one. Yeah. And so my goal in this is similar to yours, is to make it accountable in two directions. Number one, make the shareholders speak up, because the shareholders it's us, not you, Christian, but everybody else, it's us. And so we should have an impact. Number two, making more accountable at the government level. However, and maybe because I live in the United States, if you don't start having the shareholders put a limit on what these companies do, they have captured the political process. And the Constitution in the United States, at least as interpreted by the Supreme Court, say they can do whatever they want. Yes. And so it's very hard to fight that battle if you don't come from the shareholders' point of view.
I understand you're looking for a counterbalance, and in your analysis, more power to shareholders is that counterbalance you need in order, because the democratic process is as it is. Let me go to Christian Felber for a last, very short response to that, and then we have to close off, because I'm going to go back to Eefje, who kickstarted this session to give some reflection. But Christian Felber, your response.
Just very briefly, there is now appearing a lot of common ground between Luigi and myself. I would still distinguish that I would not let to the liberty of companies to accelerate climate change or stop it, to respect human rights or violate them. I would make this mandatory.
Clear.
But we agree that between the more powerful and the weak, it is freedom that enslaves, and it's the binding law that at least has the potential to protect our freedom.
Clear. Thank you. Yes, I wrote it down immediately after the two interviews. We should talk about size. Luckily, we did, because I think with that notion, the common ground was found. Thank you so much for now. I'm going to go to Eefje here in the studio in Amsterdam. You kickstarted the conversation with Aristotle, which you, of course, you found the quotation in the book of Christian Felber, right? What is your reflection on what happened this hour?
Well, thank you. And let me also first thanks to the both speakers. I think it was a very lively conversation. And I think we also got actually to the heart of the matter that we have been discussing over these couple of weeks. And the question ultimately was pointed to, well, what is the balance between the state who sets rules, so the laws, and the market actors? And I think that came very nicely to the fore.
Yeah, I also liked the idea that we should change the image of man. What is it? Is it an Homo economicus, the Pareto definition, 19th century definition, or should we rethink that and change its image?
Well, it of course depends on how you define things.
Yeah.
But I think that the Homo economicus can certainly be added with some ethical ideas. And I think it's important that education is not only focused on self-interest, of course, and Homo economicus as it has been interpreted, but that, well, as I said, ethical notions can certainly be added to be like an oil, spreading out like an oil fleck. So I think that's certainly important, yes.
Yes, interesting. Okay, so you said the distinction, what should the state do to define the limits or of the markets? That is, of course, the conversation we have been doing for 9 weeks now, right? Christian also talked about your banana example. Have you changed your mind now?
Of course, that question was the question I was expecting.
Yeah.
Well,
they are both laughing now because they're wondering, are you going to buy different bananas? Because then the world has changed after tonight.
No, the thing is that I'm a human being after all. So now I'm extremely positive about, buying the super expensive bananas at the cooperatives. But then my practical life after a certain amount of weeks will come back. And then I'm at the supermarket and I think this time it's just easier to go for.
Christian suggested you shouldn't look at this question as a consumer, but as a citizen. So think what you're going to vote in March. But Mr. Zingales was suggesting you would look from the perspective of the shareholder. So you should look at what your pension fund is doing, actually, with banana companies.
I was thinking about starting to invest in bananas tonight.
Now, well, it would be interesting if I would love to read, if you would make it public, Professor Zingales, your letter to Flint. I would love to read it.
I've not formulated yet, but I will do it.
Because it can probably be an example for millions of shareholders, pension holders in the world, right?
Yes, indeed. That's the reason why I hope to be an inspiration. But, I don't have a big bully pulpit, so I'm afraid that I publish on my website and nobody listens to it.
That's the better shareholder activism.
It's actually activism to create some common good, I hope.
I need cooperation. That's the reason why I'm spreading these ideas, to create a common group.
Yeah. Well,
no shares, but
Yeah. So let me thank our international guests for joining us this evening here from Amsterdam to you somewhere else in the world, and we're honored that you wanted to have this economic conversation with us. Also, thank you, Eefje, for your thinking and your reflection, and to the audience who watched and had all these questions and also some critical remarks. Also to you, Christian Felber, about you're too critical about what capitalism brought to human beings and to human history. We have our last session next week, and I hope everybody who's now watching will join us, the 10th edition of this series, and we will focus on the role of the European Union, because you want, bye-bye.
I would like to say one thing. I wanted to thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, I would like to thank you for hosting this debate, because I think it was a beautiful debate in which two people disagree and also found a common ground. And I think that, unfortunately, at least in the United States, I don't know in Europe, is always is increasing the fact that if you disagree, I don't talk to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the end of in my view, democracy is the end of civilization as we know. So I think that hosting this debate that was a moment very intense and with strong disagreement, but also with a lot of points of agreement, is a beautiful thing.
Okay. Well, if you're in Amsterdam, we hope to invite you to come here because we do this every night here. You're welcome if you're in Amsterdam. Okay, but next week we focus on Europe, and we'll do that with Daria Malin and Lucretia Reiglin. And we invite you to watch that. And if you want to have more information, check out our website or moralmarkets.org/future market consultation. Have a great night. Thank you.